So the main concept of a randomizer is to shuffle your pool of items in a way that means the game should still be beatable. So if you have one item that's trying to be placed into a slot that would prevent progress, then you need to reroll and place it in a different slot. And that's really how the old randomizer for Majora's Mask that I made in 2013 worked. There was no complex logic involved, it basically just placed items in such a way that you would be able to beat the game, but without any further considerations. So there may have been some items that were unobtainable, but they would have been ones that were not necessary. So I have been wanting to update this for a very long time actually, and the way that I came up with improving the logic is what you see on the screen now. So for each item, it would have a list of things that are absolutely required to get that item, things that are conditionally required, which basically gives the different methods of getting to the item. And then for this game in particular, because of the save and reset system, you do need to know the time that an item's available, the time that it's needed, and whether or not it should be repeatable over different cycles. So for example, the trade items you need to be repeatable, because if you got a trade item but you weren't able to complete the quest for it, such as like Cafe's letter, then you need to be able to get it again after you reset the game. And also, you need to get these items at particular times. So again, if we use Cafe's letter as an example, you need to get that before a certain time on the second day. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to complete the quest. So this makes the logic a lot more complex because for every item, it needs to be placed somewhere that it will be available at the time that you need it. So to go into a bit of detail about how this kind of logic works, I have the example of the hookshot on the screen. And if we want to place an item into the slot that the hookshot occupies, then we need to go back through all of its hard requirements and make sure none of them contains that item. So in this case, access to Pirate's Fortress. That means we need to access Great Bay and have the Zora Mask. So that rules out putting the Zora Mask in the hookshot slot, but it also rules out putting any item that's needed to access Great Bay. So then again, we'd have to go back through every item that's required to access Great Bay and so on until eventually you get back to no requirements remaining. And for the conditional requirements, it's a similar process, but obviously one of those branches can be taken and the rest you can allow an item to be placed in the slot, but you'd have to remove that conditional branch. So if we wanted to put the Deku Mask in the hookshot slot, then we'd have to remove the branch containing the Goron Mask, because we wouldn't have access to the Deku Mask to be able to complete that branch. But we also need to take into consideration the availability. In this case, the hookshot is available at all times, so any of the trade items could go there without issue. If it were a different item, so let's say something that's only available on the third night, then we couldn't put an item there if it were required on first day, second day, etc. And the repeatability is mostly just for convenience. We want to know which items need to be repeatable. But for the slot, that's usually not an issue, because you can always just tell the game that this item can be obtained more than once. It's just a case of removing conditional branches in the code. So that's really a bit of a brief explanation, not very in-depth, but that wasn't really meant to be the point of this video. So let's talk about the items themselves. So here I have a table where I've sorted the list of items that I came up with into categories. And you'll see this is much more extensive than the old randomizer, since it includes basically everything that one didn't. However, it does remove some items, so I've removed the Fierce Deity mask, and I've removed Deku Nut and Deku Stick drops. I just felt those added nothing to the randomization, and there was no point in keeping them. I've also not listed the bottle contents in this table, but they're separate from the main item list anyway. So what you'll probably notice is that some of the counts are off. So for example, masks is 22 instead of 23. That's because All Night Mask is counted as a shop item, and the similar thing for the bomb bag. But also, some items are considered to be part of the initial file conditions. So you'll start off in Clocktown with Song of Time, Song of Healing, Ocarina of Time, much like in the old randomizer. So just one thing I will note, Stray Fairies and Stray Fairy chests are not included in this list, and neither are Gold Sculptures. I just think, again, there is absolutely no point in including these. There are a lot of items already, and I will be talking a bit more about my thoughts on that in a moment. So here I have a pie chart just showing the same data in a bit more readable format, so you can much more easily see the relative sizes of each category of items. And well, this is the part of the video where I'm going to start saying what I think about Randomizer and Majora's Mask, so feel free to skip ahead. So in my opinion, the biggest problem with randomization in this game is what should be evident from the pie chart. Half of the items are completely useless in terms of progression. Well, more than half of them really, when you take into account that most of the masks don't open up a whole lot. They'll give you one or two more checks that you can make, so you don't get much progression out of those. And a lot of the items as well are just not really needed. I mean, this is from my perspective. I prefer to play with glitches. I cannot really speak on behalf of glitchless playthrough, because I've not personally even tried that with this kind of randomization. But yeah, basically for me it's just that every other item that you pick up is heart piece, rupees, heart piece, rupees.
Big money!
Anyway, let's have a look at what items you really need when you're doing a playthrough. So, special shoutouts to Jimmy1717, who made the tracker that I'm using to display the items. Anyway, so for a playthrough with glitches, you really don't need a lot at all. And that's probably why I have complaints about playing a randomizer, because you get so much stuff that's just not useful for your progression. So for playing with glitches, you don't need most of the item screen. You only need 2 masks. you don't really need any items in dungeons. You only really need one key in Stone Tower so that you can get to the light arrows. Of course, in a randomizer you might not need that at all because you might already have them. But then it comes down to whether you want to go and make the check of that chest, because it might have something good in it, but you never know. If you're playing without glitches, you need a few more items, but still, like, you don't need the majority of items in the game. They're just not necessary to be able to beat it. And again, that's just my personal complaint with playing randomizer with this game. At least if you have the goal of beating the game. If you're doing something like bingo, it's probably a bit more interesting, but I've not done that in a long time, so... But I think that's enough about item randomization. So let's talk about some other interesting randomization that can be done. So, enemies and music. So I have actually made a working enemy randomizer. When I say working, I mean it does technically work, but it's far from perfect. I think enemy randomization is quite difficult to do in this game. I'll explain a bit more in a moment, but first I just want to show you some clips. So this is quite cool to see, and it's quite funny to play it as well. But like I said, there are a few problems, mostly to do with some of the actor placement, some of the variables as well. But one of the major problems is the memory usage. So I have a workaround, which is just not to allow the objects to take up more space than the ones that were previously loaded. But that's far from perfect, and it doesn't allow a very good selection of enemies really, because it's always trying to take up less space where it doesn't necessarily need to. So really what I need to do is get a bit better understanding of the memory map. I mean, this is just a vague representation, but it's not exact. I know roughly what the memory map is, but I have not gone into detail calculating the amount of memory that's used by all the actors and the objects in the map and the scene. But that's important because once I know that, I'll be able to know exactly which enemies I can load without taking up too much memory, which will just make it a bit more interesting. At the moment it seems to pick the same enemies over and over, so one thing I see all the time is it puts likes everywhere, which is just annoying because those are not very good enemies. So I want to briefly talk about the music randomizer before I end the video. I've been able to import music from Star Fox 64, Super Mario 64, as well as Ocarina of Time. And I've also got some custom music, some that I've written myself from years ago or some more recently, and some that I've taken from other games, like my import of Hyrule Castle from Breath of the Wild. Anyway, just wanted to mention that, and I'll play a few clips, I guess. But I think I've done enough talking for this video, so at this point, I will peace out, and thank you for watching.
Hey!